Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Bones and All, starring Timothy Chalamet, Taylor Russell, and Mark Rylance, directed by Luca Guadagnino. Now, I've never seen this movie before, so let's just get straight to it. I wanted to see this in theaters, but then I heard some things about something that I'll talk about in the show. Let's get into it. We open with some paintings while the opening credits roll as we start in a high school around the 1980s. It doesn't say what year to be exact, but where Marin, played by Taylor Russell, plays the piano and she gets an invite from a friend from school to a sleepover. And Marin's father picks her up as she drives home, and nighttime comes and has dinner with her father, and she goes to sleep as she sneaks out to her friend's place. And she gets there, they have some fun with each other until Mirren bites off one of her fingers, which shocked the fuck out of me as an opener. It completely caught me off guard, as I knew this movie was an R rating, but I couldn't tell you for what reason off the top of my head when I pushed play on my Amazon Prime Video account, as this movie is very fucking graphic, as I didn't care for this opener that much. Marin's father moves her to a different location and abandons Marin and leaves her a note as well as a tape recorder with a message on it, as we learn about what he says he'll never see him again, ever again. And we learn some messages for half the movie, and director Luca Guadagnino does a fine job at telling a story about cannibals. And yes, I said it. This movie is about cannibals, which shocked me when I first heard about it. And Marin takes a bus to Columbus while the clerk asks her, shouldn't she be in school? And that felt like that was none of her fucking business at all. And she takes the bus to Columbus, and their cinematography looks great as she goes worldwide to different places, which looks great. Karen stops, Marin stops, at a town and is encountered by Sully, played by Mark Rylance, as he can smell her as she's hungry, and he brings her over to his place to have some dinner together, which happens to be a living body as a human being. And the next morning, Sully eats it, as does Mirren, and this scene in this movie is oddly placed. But I guess that is Guadagnino's style, but it's not as distracting as Yorgos Lanthimos' score in other movies, in my opinion, I'll say, or any of his films. And I'm just going to full out warn you, if you don't like movies about cannibals, I recommend you don't watch this movie for that reason alone. As there's a scene involving cannibalism there's scenes involving cannibalism throughout the movie, which in my opinion, this movie is very graphic. Take it from someone who might have shown people maybe some things like that before and didn't feel right doing it in any ways. Marin leaves Sully's house, and Sully sees her leaving, and despite Mark Rylance is a very good actor, but his role in this felt a little wasted in my opinion. Marin continues on her adventure to find her mother as she stops for the night in Ohio, I'm guessing is where it is. They do the initials, which I can't remember off the top of my head what that means, while she goes to Indiana and goes in a store and sees Lee, played by Timothy Chalamet, as he picks a fight with a dumb asshole picking on a woman and her daughter. And nighttime comes, and we see Lee eats the motherfucker, and Marion hitches with him. And Timothy Chalamet does a good job at portraying any character to even here, while Taylor Russell is fine despite this movie is about her character, whom I'm not sure how I feel about any of the characters in general. Lee takes Marion to her mother as they go in a house for the night, as they play some music from the band Kiss from the 70s, I'll say. And next day they go to a diner, and have some breakfast, and they drive on to the next house, which happens to be Lee's aunt's house. And the shots are great in this movie, in my opinion, and the writing is good, and the two leads, Timothy Chalamet and Taylor Russell, have a little chemistry, in my opinion. Lee's sister, Kayla, comes by and calls him an asshole, and they go outside and talk while Mirren overhears the conversation, and they leave at night and stop in at a farm full of cows, and they watch cows together. And the next day comes, and they drive away to different states, and they stop at a river in the middle of nowhere. And the river is shot beautifully, as Jake, played by Michael Stolberg, whom I reviewed so many times before, and Brad, played by David Gordon Green, as I reviewed his Halloween requel trilogy, as they hang out with Lee and Mirren as their normal human beings. And this shot was absolutely dark to the point I can't see their goddamn faces until Lee and Mirren drives away from Jake and Brad. And I didn't like those two characters as they come out stiff, and thank God they ditched them at the end of the scene. We continue on their adventures as they go to a carnival and ride the Ferris wheel, and they fall in love as Lee goes up to a carnival man who cheats a kid and gives Lee a couple of chances to throw a ball in the cup, and he offers Lee some weed while Mirren listens to her father's tape while Lee gets some weed as he kisses the carnival man, and they hump each other's asses briefly until he eats the carnival man as Mirren joins him off screen, and they drive away all bloodied up and shit as Mirren runs to a house with the family, and the camera shakes as she runs and she's with the carnival man as they didn't know, and drive away. And half of these scenes are fucking dark, just so dark. I can't see some of this shit. And could Luca Guadagnino afford lighting for a few scenes? Because it sure as hell doesn't feel like it. They get an address to her mother's place and go to the house, and as it's not her mother, it's her grandmother named Barbara Kearns, played by Jessica Harper, who was briefly in the Suspiria remake as she was in the original Suspiria as well. As I didn't know she played the wife and the doctor in the remake, as I reviewed her before in Steven Spielberg's Minority Report many years ago. And Marion asks about her mother and where she came from as she learned she was adopted. And Marion asks if her mother hurt anyone, and she tells her she's at a mental hospital. And I didn't like what Jessica Harper was doing in this movie, as she felt wasted in this movie too. Lee drives Mirren to the mental hospital, and she goes in on her own and sees her mother as she doesn't recognize her as she bites her arms. Yeah, she bit her arms off after she wrote a letter 15 years ago about how fucked up she is, as she doesn't want to hurt Mirren and her father after Mirren reads the letter, and Mirren gets bitten by her mother, and Mirren runs out of the bill there all afraid, and she leaves, and she gets her frustration out on Lee while she talks to him about how he slit his father's throat, and he makes her pick her choice, and as she drives away with Lee in the car. And I honestly couldn't tell you what the fuck just happened at this point, while Mirren stops the truck for gas as she leaves the money as she runs away from Lee, and does try to look for her. Lee does, I'll say, until Mirren encounters Sully, of all people, as he followed her where they're at, and I don't know why she tried to leave him to begin with, as that didn't make a lot of sense. And then by him, I'm talking about Lee. Marion doesn't feel comfortable being around Sully as she doesn't trust him, and he goes off on her and calls her the C word, which is not one of my favorite words, I'll say, and he drives away, and she enters a restaurant and she destroys the tape as Lee is completely depressed about Mirren and thinks about how he killed his father, and calls Kayla as he tells her he's coming home. And we move on to July, where Mirren bumps into Kayla while she eats some ice cream and tells Mirren how drunk their father was. And Mirren looks for Lee in a place full of tents, and they get back together and see the fireworks, as I'm led to believe it's 4th of July. As they want to take off together, and I'm kind of enjoying myself for this climax so far. They drive away and go to random places in the middle of nowhere, and Lee monologues about something pretty graphic about his brother as he ate him up, and he said it was fun and great at the same time, as they become people and buy a place and get jobs together as well as do things together, until one day Sully breaks into their place and brings a knife with him, and he drools and deals with unfinished business until Lee enters the room, and he and Mirren kill Sully by stabbing him repeatedly as the music goes on in the room while outside is completely quiet, which was an interesting choice. And they eat Sully for lunch. As Sully dies, they take a breath as Lee was stabbed as well as Lee asking Mirren to eat him. And she says no until eventually she does and leaves the place and town behind. The climax was interesting in a way. I kind of like it, but at the same time, I do not, as it was odd and graphic for damn sure. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 5.0 out of 10. It has some great shots, as the cinematography is great to look at, and the characters, I don't mind them, as Timothée Chalamet does a good job at portraying any character, in my opinion. Taylor Russell is fine here, and Mark Rylance is a very good actor, but he felt kind of wasted by this role, in my opinion, as I'm not sure how I feel about their characters in general. The score was oddly placed, but it's not as distracting as a Yorgos Lanthimos film. And director Luca Guadagnino does a fine job telling this story about cannibals, as this isn't the Silence of the Lambs good, as I'm not into movies about cannibalism in general, and this movie proves my point on why, which I'll explain in the next sentence. The movie is graphic, and it earns the R rating for a damn good reason, as I didn't remember why it was R rated when I pushed play on my Amazon Prime Video account. And if anyone saw this review and doesn't know what this movie is about and are not a fan of graphic violence, I recommend you don't watch this movie blinded. Or if you don't remember why it was R rated like I did not expect the graphic violence, then don't watch this movie. And if you do know some things like I kind of did, then go ahead and watch the movie, but not without what the R rating reasons are, as this is a middle of the road for me, but hopefully Challengers will be better than this. We'll see, as this is not my favorite to watch. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with Challengers. And until then, let's eat.